The morning I moved into my new home, I didn't expect the HOA president to show up at my door, holding a measuring tape, not a welcome basket. Within days, letters started piling up, violations for things I didn't even know were rules. My mailbox was the wrong shade of beige, my curtains too reflective. Then one night, I caught someone standing in my yard with a flashlight, taking pictures of my windows. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules at all. What happens when power becomes obsession and the neighborhood turns against you? When Megan bought her little lakefront cabin, she thought she'd finally found peace. After years of renting in the city, this was her dream. Quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, her golden retriever splashing in the shallows, and sunsets that painted the water gold. The property wasn't fancy, but it was hers. She had worked overtime, saved every dollar, and pictured this cabin as the start of a new chapter, a place to breathe, to heal, and to live on her own terms. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first glance. Neatly trimmed lawns, pastel houses with flagpoles, and neighbors who waved but never lingered. Everything looked so peaceful that Megan didn't think twice about the homeowners association. It was just a small annual fee, she was told, to keep things nice. Her first week went by quietly. She spent her days unpacking boxes, painting the deck, and learning the rhythm of the lake. At night, she'd sit on the porch with a blanket, listening to crickets and the faint hum of boats in the distance. For the first time in years, she slept deeply. But peace doesn't last long in neighborhoods that run on control. It started with small things. A man in khaki shorts slowing his golf cart as he passed her driveway. A woman taking photos of her front yard, pretending to check for weeds. A note left in her mailbox with no signature, reminding her that unsightly items must be stored out of view. At first, Megan laughed it off. Every community had that one nosy neighbor. Maybe this was just part of the culture, people being overly proud of their little slice of suburbia. But then she started hearing whispers about them. The board. Apparently, every decision in this community, from mailbox color to porch lights, had to be approved by the HOA board, run by a retired couple who treated the neighborhood like their personal kingdom. The president, Karen was known for driving around in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, documenting infractions. Some neighbors joked about her. Others lowered their voices when her name came up. Megan didn't pay much attention until the first letter arrived. It was written in an oddly formal tone, with a logo at the top and her name typed in bold. The letter informed her that her dock railing did not meet community aesthetic standards. She stared at the paper, confused. The dock had been there long before she bought the house. It was safe, sturdy, and painted white like all the others. She brushed it off. Maybe a clerical error. Then came the second letter. This one warning of potential fines, and then the third. Suddenly, her dream retreat didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like someone was always watching. Her next-door neighbor, an older man named Dave, quietly warned her over the fence. "You're new," he said, glancing around. "They test you first. See how far they can push?" Megan tried to stay calm, to follow the rules, to avoid drawing attention. But as weeks went by, the letters didn't stop. They grew longer, more specific, criticizing everything from her garden hose color to the size of her welcome mat. Each one signed the same way. Karen Whitmore, O President. Something about that signature started to feel personal. She began noticing Karen's golf cart more often, slowing near her house, idling by her driveway. One afternoon, Megan came home to find Karen standing near her property line, snapping pictures with her phone. That night, Megan sat on her porch, letter after letter spread out before her, her heart pounding. She had moved here to find peace, to start over. But somehow she had stepped into a world where control hid behind polite smiles and community standards, and deep down, she felt something shifting. This wasn't about a railing, or a mat, or even a rule. This was about power. And she was about to challenge the person who thought she owned the entire lake. At first, Megan tried to comply. She repainted her dock railing, replaced her mailbox, even adjusted her porch lights to meet the community-approved wattage. Every task felt like a test she didn't sign up for, a slow, erosion of her independence disguised as neighborhood harmony. But the letters didn't stop. Each envelope carried a new accusation. Her garden was non-compliant. Her dogs barking disturbed the peace. Even her recycling bins were labeled unsightly. It didn't matter how many times she fixed things. The HOA found something else. And behind every letter was that same elegant signature, Karen Whitmore, HOA President. By month 3, Megan had stopped feeling safe in her own home. Neighbors she once waved to now avoided eye contact. Conversations ended abruptly when she walked by. And every time she looked out the window, she half expected to see that golf cart, slow, silent, circling her property like a predator watching its prey. One morning, she found a notice taped to her door in red ink, mandatory compliance inspection, 48 hours notice. The inspection, it said, was to assess ongoing violations that threaten community aesthetic integrity. Megan's stomach turned. The language was cold, bureaucratic, almost threatening. She had never even spoken to Karen directly, only through letters that made her feel like a criminal in her own home. She called the HOA office, but no one answered. When she finally reached a board member, they gave a vague response. "It's standard procedure, ma'am. Nothing to worry about." But something about their tone felt off, rehearsed, nervous. That's when she decided to document everything. Every letter, every fine, every suspicious visit. She took photos, kept records, and even installed a small security camera on her porch. The inspection day arrived with perfect weather. Blue skies, still water, and a sense of dread that knotted in her chest. At 10 a.m., the golf cart appeared. Karen stepped out, clipboard in hand, followed by 2 other board members wearing matching polo shirts. Without a word, they began circling the house, taking pictures, pointing at the dock, and scribbling notes. Megan tried to stay calm, watching from the porch. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. Karen didn't look up. "Just doing our job," she said flatly. They stayed for nearly an hour, measuring, photographing, muttering. When they finally left, Megan felt shaken. It was more than an inspection. It was intimidation. 2 days later, she received a violation summary listing 7 new infractions, including one for unauthorized decorative plant placement. That's when she realized this wasn't enforcement, it was harassment. Over the next few weeks, the pressure escalated. Fines arrived almost weekly. $50 for a mailbox too close to the curb. $75 for a garden gnome visible from the street. $100 for unapproved modifications. Referring to the bird feeder she hung near her window, she reached out to other homeowners for support, but most avoided involvement. Some whispered warnings. You don't want to get on Karen's bad side, but a few quietly sympathized. One evening, an older woman named Linda stopped by under the guise of borrowing sugar. She lowered her voice. "You're not the first, dear. They did the same thing to the Millers before they moved out. Karen doesn't like new people, especially ones who don't fall in line." That night, Megan sat by the lake, clutching the latest violation letter. The reflection of the HOA office lights shimmered across the water, bright, distant, untouchable. She felt cornered. Things reached a breaking point when Megan's mailbox disappeared entirely. One morning, she walked down her driveway to find the post uprooted. The box gone and tire tracks pressed deep into the dirt. She called the local sheriff's office, but without witnesses. There was little they could do. When she contacted the HOA to report vandalism, she received a reply that stunned her. "It is possible your previous mailbox did not meet installation standards. The HOA will approve a replacement once a compliant design is submitted for review. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just another layer of control." Megan's frustration hardened into resolve. She wasn't going to be bullied out of her own property. She began digging deeper into HOA records, public filings, financial reports, and community bylaws. The more she read, the clearer it became. Karen had been president for nearly a decade, re-elected every year with no challengers. The same 3 board members rotated positions, secretary, treasurer, vice president, creating an unbroken cycle of power. Worse, the HOA had quietly raised fines and administrative fees over time, funneling thousands into community improvement funds that no one could trace. Megan realized she wasn't just fighting a petty neighbor, she was uncovering a system built to protect itself. Then came the lake access revocation notice. The letter stated that due to her ongoing noncompliance, Megan's rights to use the shared dock and community beach were temporarily suspended. That was the moment it became personal. The lake was her sanctuary, the reason she bought this home. To have it taken away for arbitrary violations felt cruel, calculated. She posted about her experience on a local community forum, detailing the harassment, the fines, and the revoked privileges. Within hours, comments poured in. Some defended the HOA, but many shared similar stories. Photos of letters, warnings, and threats. And then, one anonymous user posted something chilling. "Be careful. They've done worse to others who fought back." Days later, strange things began happening. Her trash bins were knocked over at night. Deep scratches appeared on her car door. One morning, she found a dead fish placed neatly on her porch steps. It felt like a message. She reported it all to the police. But again, no witnesses, no proof. So she decided to fight differently. Megan contacted a local investigative journalist who had covered HOA corruption before. Together, they started collecting stories and documents, financial discrepancies, unauthorized spending, and emails hinting at favoritism. It all pointed to something much bigger than one homeowner's feud. But when Karen caught wind of the investigation, the retaliation doubled. The HOA sent a final warning. Failure to comply within 10 days will result in legal escalation and potential property liens. The pressure mounted. Her phone rang constantly with restricted numbers. Anonymous notes appeared under her doormat. Neighbors who once smiled now turned away. But Megan had something the HOA didn't expect. Evidence. She had copies of letters, photos of Karen's visits, videos of inspections, and a detailed log of every fine. She compiled everything into a single folder labeled Proof. She was done playing defense. One afternoon, as she loaded groceries into her car, Karen approached her, smiling that perfect, empty smile. "I hope you understand this isn't personal," Karen said, voice syrupy sweet. "We just have to maintain standards." Megan stared at her, unflinching. "Then why does it only apply to me?" Karen's smile faltered. "Just slightly." "Careful," she said softly. "Some things are better left alone." Then she turned, got into her golf cart, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and dread behind. That night, Megan received an email, unsigned, no subject line. Just one sentence. "If you go through with this, you'll regret it." Her hands trembled as she read it. She didn't know who sent it, but she knew exactly who it was meant to protect. The next morning, she drove straight to the county courthouse. With the journalist's help, she filed formal complaints against the HOA board for harassment, financial misconduct, and property interference. It was a bold move, and she knew it would ignite a storm. By the end of the week, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Some whispered that Megan was brave, others called her reckless. But no one could deny it anymore. The perfect little lakeside community had cracks spreading through its foundation. And when local news crews showed up at the HOA office, cameras rolling, the board went silent. Emails went unanswered. Meetings were postponed. And for the first time, Karen's golf cart didn't make its morning rounds. Still, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, because people like Karen don't surrender quietly. Behind every smile, every neatly trimmed hedge, there was a deeper rot, a truth that Megan was now dangerously close to exposing. The calm before the storm had ended, and the fight for her home and her dignity was just beginning. The week after the news story broke, everything changed. The lake community, once silent and uniform, buzzed with whispers. Neighbors who had never looked Megan in the eye were suddenly stopping by just to say hello. Some brought cookies, others just curiosity. But behind every polite smile was a question they were too afraid to ask aloud. What's going to happen to the HOA? For the first time, Karen Whitmore's name carried more fear than authority. The TV segment had exposed just enough: missing financial reports, questionable fines, unapproved projects, to make the board look bad, but not enough to destroy them outright. Karen responded the way every tyrant does when cornered, by doubling down. A formal emergency HOA meeting was announced the following week. Attendance was mandatory. The notice didn't specify why, but everyone knew. It was about Megan. That night, the community hall filled with folding chairs, murmurs, and unease. Karen stood at the front, clipboard in hand, her usual calm replaced with something colder, calculated. The board members flanked her like guards. When Megan walked in, conversations halted. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some sympathetic, others sharp and judging. She took a seat near the back, her heart pounding, but her expression steady. Karen cleared her throat, voice echoing through the small hall. Tonight, we will be addressing ongoing disruptions and false accusations that threaten the harmony of our community. Her tone dripped with authority. Rehearsed, smooth, weaponized, she continued, pacing slowly. Recent allegations made by a homeowner have resulted in unnecessary attention, damaging our neighborhood's reputation. We will be voting on disciplinary measures to restore order. Megan felt every word like a punch. Disciplinary measures. It sounded like a verdict before a trial. She rose from her seat. I have the right to respond, she said firmly. Karen smiled without warmth. Of course, briefly. The room went silent. Megan stepped forward, clutching a folder, the same one labeled Proof. She spoke evenly at first. When I moved here, I wanted what everyone here wanted. Peace, safety, community. But instead, I found intimidation, harassment, and manipulation disguised as rules. She opened the folder, pulling out photos, printed emails, and letters. Every one of these violations was issued by this board, most signed personally by you, Mrs. Whitmore. Karen's expression didn't flicker, but her jaw tightened. These aren't about aesthetics or compliance, Megan continued, voice growing stronger. They're about control. You've used your position to target anyone who questions your authority. She held up a printout of a bank statement, the result of weeks of digging. And maybe that's why community funds are missing. Nearly $14,000 labeled as maintenance projects that never happened. The crowd stirred. Murmurs. Gasps. The sound of whispered names. Karen tried to interject. That's a baseless... Megan cut her off. The receipts say otherwise. And the county records show those checks were cashed under your husband's business account. The murmurs turned to open chatter. Even the other board members shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, Karen's voice faltered. You're misinterpreting... No, Megan said sharply. I'm exposing. She turned to face the crowd. This community deserves better than fear. Better than fines handed out like punishment. Better than a board that hides behind bylaws to silence anyone who questions them. The air in the room crackled. Every eye was on her. On the woman who had dared to stand up to the person everyone else avoided. Karen's mask slipped. Enough! She snapped, slamming her clipboard onto the table. You have no authority to accuse this board of... But before she could finish, a voice rose from the front row. I got fined for my fence color, an older man said, trembling slightly. But Karen's was never approved either. Another voice joined in. She fined me for leaving my kayak on the beach, while hers sits there all summer. Then another. Where's the money from the road repair fund? It spread like wildfire. Years of resentment spilling out, the fear finally breaking. Karen tried to shout over them, but the noise drowned her out. Her clipboard hit the floor. When the shouting died down, Megan spoke again. Calm, clear, steady. I've already filed everything with the county's Homeowners Association Oversight Board. They've opened a formal investigation, and I have a lawyer. Karen froze. For the first time, she looked small. Fragile even, as if the years of control had finally turned back on her. You can't, she began, voice trembling. I already did, Megan replied. Within days, the fallout began. The investigation expanded faster than anyone expected. Audit teams reviewed the HOA's accounts, revealing not just financial discrepancies, but evidence of falsified vote records and misuse of funds. Karen's name appeared again and again. Signatures on approvals that never passed board review, invoices paid to her relatives' companies. News spread beyond the neighborhood. Local headlines read, HOA President under. Investigation for fraud and harassment. The perfect little lakeside community had become the center of scandal. Neighbors once too afraid to speak now stepped forward, each with their own story of bullying, fines, or intimidation. Megan watched it all unfold with a mix of relief and disbelief. She had expected resistance, not collapse, but power built on fear doesn't fade gracefully. One evening, a week into the investigation, Megan returned home to find tire tracks again, this time cutting across her lawn. Her security camera caught it all. Karen's golf cart, headlights off, coasting quietly down her driveway. Megan's chest tightened. She called the sheriff immediately. Within minutes, deputies arrived. The next morning, Karen was served with a restraining order. The image of her standing on her own porch, arguing with officers as neighbors watched from behind curtains, became the talk of the town. The queen of the HOA, dethroned in her own kingdom. But the true moment of reckoning came at the final board hearing, held to decide the HOA's future leadership. Karen sat at the front, pale and tense. The board's attorney had already resigned. The state auditor's report was damning: misuse of community funds, unapproved enforcement actions, harassment of residents. When it came time for her to speak, she tried to reclaim her old tone, calm, commanding. "I acted only in the best interest of this community," she said. "Everything I did was for order, for beauty." Megan interrupted softly. "For control." Silence. Then, one by one, the homeowners stood up and voted. Motion to remove the entire HOA board. Passed. Motion to disband and reform the association under county oversight. Passed. It was over. Karen gathered her papers in silence. For a moment their eyes met. Megan's steady, Karen's hollow. Then the once-feared president turned and walked out, her heels echoing down the hall like the last sound of a crumbling rain. When Megan stepped outside, the sun was setting over the lake, the same lake she'd nearly lost. The air felt lighter, freer. Neighbors she'd barely spoken to approached her, some thanking her, some apologizing for their silence. She smiled, exhausted but at peace for the first time in months. But as she turned toward her home, a thought lingered, quiet, unsettling. The investigation wasn't over. Other names were still under review. Other communities were watching. The battle was won. But the war for fairness in neighborhoods like this one was far from finished. And as the water reflected the fading light, Megan couldn't help but wonder how many other Karens still ruled behind closed gates, unchecked, waiting for someone brave enough to stand up. In the weeks that followed the vote, the lake community entered a silence it had never known before. No more morning golf cart patrols. No more violation letters tucked under doormats. No more whispers about who broke which rule. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt still. The air, once heavy with tension, was clear. Kids played near the water again. Neighbors lingered outside, unafraid to chat. And Megan, the woman who had been called trouble and defiant, was now the quiet hero no one could ignore. But victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like recovery. The county's investigation moved forward, slow but relentless. By the end of the month, the audit confirmed what many had suspected. The HOA's funds had been misused for years, spent on personal landscaping, private events, and consulting fees that led straight back to Karen and her circle of loyal board members. Criminal charges were filed. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, and harassment. Karen's name appeared on every page of the report. The woman who once ruled over porch colors and mailbox heights now stood before a judge, facing consequences she'd never believed possible. Megan didn't attend the hearing. She didn't need to. Watching the community finally stand on its own was enough. Still, when she saw the news headline, "Former HOA President Sentenced to Restitution and Community Service," she felt a quiet sense of closure. Not triumph, just balance. The county appointed a temporary management team to handle the HOA's transition. Transparency became the new rule. Every expense, every vote, every inspection, all open to public record. When nominations opened for the new board, several neighbors urged Megan to run. "You've already done more for this place than anyone ever has," Linda told her one afternoon. "You understand fairness? That's what we need." But Megan just smiled. "I didn't fight for power," she said softly. "I fought to stop it from being abused." Instead, she volunteered as an advisor, helping draft new bylaws that prioritized homeowner rights and accountability. No more anonymous fines. No more unchecked authority. Every enforcement now required majority approval, documented and accessible to all. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Months passed. The seasons shifted. Megan's cabin, once the center of conflict, became a quiet symbol of resilience. Her porch, where she had once sat surrounded by letters and worry, now overlooked calm water and laughter echoing across the lake. Her dog, Cooper, chased ducks again without someone threatening to fine her for disturbing wildlife. The lake returned to what it was always meant to be, a place of peace. Yet even in peace, scars remained. One evening, Megan received a handwritten note in her mailbox. It was from Dave, the neighbor who had once warned her to be careful. "You reminded us what courage looks like," it read. "For years, we just followed the rules because it was easier than fighting. But you showed us that silence isn't peace. It's surrender." She read those words again and again, tears welling in her eyes, because he was right. She hadn't just changed her neighborhood. She had changed people's understanding of what community really meant, but not everyone moved on easily. Karen sold her home quietly that winter. Rumor had it, she moved 2 towns over, into a gated community with no HOA. Irony has a strange sense of humor. A few of her old allies left too, unable to face the shame of their exposure. The lake community slowly rebuilt itself. They planted trees along the shoreline, organized potlucks instead of patrols. People smiled again, not out of forced politeness, but genuine relief. It was strange, Megan thought, how something as small as a rule book could tear people apart, and how something as human as empathy could stitch them back together. Still, she never forgot the nights of fear, the headlights across her yard, the threats, the feeling of being watched. She knew what unchecked authority could do when no one questioned it, so she began to write. At first, it was just notes, reminders, reflections. But over time, her words turned into something more. An article, then a column, then a short essay published in a regional paper titled, "When Home Isn't Yours Anymore, How HOAs Cross the Line." It went viral, shared thousands of times, picked up by national outlets, discussed on talk radio and community forums. Homeowners across the country wrote to her, sharing their own stories of intimidation, bias, and abuse of power hidden behind fences and bylaws. She realized she had struck a nerve, and maybe even started a movement. A year later, Megan stood once again by the lake, this time speaking, at a small community gathering organized to celebrate Neighborhood Freedom Day, the 1-year anniversary of the HOA's reform. The sunset painted the water orange and gold, just like the day she first arrived. But now the air carried laughter, music, and peace. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't use notes. She just looked at the faces before her. People who had once been strangers, now connected by something deeper than geography. "I used to think home was just a place," she began. "Walls, windows, a view, but I learned it's something else entirely. Home is the space where you're free to live without fear. It's where rules protect, not punish. And it's where community means standing up, not standing by." The crowd was silent, moved. Then someone started clapping, and then another. Soon the whole group was on their feet, not for spectacle, but for gratitude. Later that night, as the gathering ended and the stars blinked awake over the lake, Megan sat on her porch sipping tea. She thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the fight, the fallout, and the strange, fragile beauty that had come from it. She wasn't angry anymore, just wiser, because she understood something most people don't realize until it's too late. Power doesn't corrupt suddenly. It grows quietly behind small rules and polite smiles, until someone dares to say no. And sometimes, one no is all it takes to change everything. Months later, Megan received an email from a stranger in another state. "Your story inspired our neighborhood to stand up too. Our HOA president was embezzling funds, and because of you, we found the courage to investigate. Thank you for reminding us we're not alone." Megan smiled as she read it. The story that began with a dock railing and a few letters had rippled far beyond. Her lake, a wave of change spreading quietly across communities that had forgotten their own strength. On her porch wall hung a framed piece of paper, one of the old violation letters from Karen. The words still read, Your property does not meet community standards. But Megan had written something across it in bold, black ink. My standards are freedom, fairness, and peace. Every morning, as sunlight poured across her porch, the words glowed faintly, a quiet reminder that even the smallest acts of defiance can echo louder than fear. When the breeze rustled the trees, she could still hear the lake's calm rhythm. The world had gone back to normal, or maybe, for the first time, it had finally become what normal was supposed to be. A neighbor's laughter carried across the water. Children splashed at the edge. Somewhere a wind chime sang, and Megan, the woman who had once felt powerless, smiled to herself. She had come to this lake searching for peace. In the end, she had built it. Final takeaway. In every neighborhood, there's someone who thinks control equals order. Someone who hides behind rules to mask insecurity or power to feed pride. But the truth is simple. No rule is stronger than what's right. And when you stand up for fairness, no matter how small the fight, you don't just protect your home. You remind the world what community was meant to be. Fade out to lake sounds, soft waves, distant laughter, and the hum of peace restored.